My parents handed me mortgage papers for my sister's $350,000 house and said, "You're paying this." I'm Rebecca, 35, worked 2 jobs for 15 years, saved every penny. My sister Michelle never held a job longer than 6 months, but somehow she deserved a house. When I refused to become her personal ATM, my own parents took me to court for $350,000. The judge asked one question that changed everything and exposed the truth about my family. This is how I learned the most expensive lesson about family manipulation and broke free forever. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Riverside, California, the Martinez family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Dad worked construction, Mom managed a dental office, and we had that classic suburban house with the white picket fence that screamed, "American Dream Achieved." But inside those walls, there were rules I didn't even know existed until much later. I was the responsible one. Always had been. While other kids played video games after school, I was at my desk doing homework, then helping Mom with dinner, then studying more. Michelle, 2 years younger, would float through the house like she was visiting a hotel. She'd leave dishes in the sink, clothes on the floor, and somehow it became my job to clean up after her. "Rebecca's so good at organizing," Mom would say with that proud smile. "She just has that natural ability to take care of things." By high school, the pattern was set in stone. I worked weekends at the local coffee shop, saving every dollar for college. Michelle got a weekly allowance for doing absolutely nothing. When I asked why, Dad's answer was always the same. "Your sister needs to focus on her social development. You're already so mature, Rebecca. You understand responsibility." College was 4 years of ramen noodles and library study sessions while I worked 2 part-time jobs. Michelle went to community college for 6 months before dropping out to find herself. Mom and Dad paid for her classes, her car, her apartment. When I graduated with my engineering degree and landed my first job at a tech company, the family narrative was clear. Rebecca was the success story, which meant Rebecca could afford to help. The helping started small, 100 here, 50 there. "Just until Michelle gets back on her feet," Mom would say. But Michelle's feet never seemed to find solid ground. She'd work at a restaurant for 3 months, quit because the manager was mean, then need rent money. She'd try retail, quit because standing all day was exhausting, then need grocery money. 7 different jobs in 5 years, and somehow it was always someone else's fault. Meanwhile, I was building my life methodically. I got promoted to senior engineer, bought a modest condo, and saved religiously. Every Friday, I'd transfer money to my savings account like it was a religious ritual. My coworkers would invite me out for drinks, but I'd decline, watching my bank balance grow instead. "Family first," Mom had always said. "Family always comes first." I thought I was being responsible, building a foundation for my future. I had no idea I was building a target on my back. The first real crack appeared last Christmas. We were all gathered around Mom's dining table, the good china sparkling under the chandelier lights. Michelle had just quit another job, this time a boutique where she claimed the customers were too demanding. She was picking at her food, that familiar pouty expression on her face, when she suddenly brightened. "I saw the most beautiful house today," she announced, cutting through Dad's story about work. "It's in that new development off Magnolia. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, granite countertops. It's like something from a magazine." Mom's eyes lit up immediately. "Oh, honey, that sounds wonderful. You deserve something beautiful." I kept eating, assuming this was just another one of Michelle's daydreams. She was always talking about things she wanted but could never afford. Designer bags, expensive cars, trips to Europe. Mom and Dad would nod along supportively while I did the mental math of how impossible it all was. "The thing is," Michelle continued, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when she wanted something, "they're offering really good financing options. The mortgage would only be like $1,500 a month." Only $1,500. I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. That was more than my mortgage payment, and I actually had a steady job. "That's a significant commitment, sweetheart," Dad said, but his tone was gentle, encouraging. "What kind of down payment would you need?" "Well, that's the thing." Michelle's eyes flickered to me for just a second. I'd need about $20,000 down plus closing costs. But the realtor said with good cosigners, the bank would definitely approve it. The room went quiet except for the gentle clink of silverware on plates. I could feel something shifting, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air gets heavy and electric. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks, the kind married couples develop after decades together, a whole conversation in a single glance. "Rebecca," Mom said finally, her voice warm and casual. "Didn't you mention you've been saving quite a bit?" And there it was. The moment I should have seen coming, but somehow never did. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me expectantly, like I was an ATM machine they'd just discovered in their living room. "I have some savings," I said carefully, "for my retirement and emergencies." "But you're only 35, Michelle said, leaning forward with sudden animation. "You have tons of time to save for retirement, and this would be helping family. That's what family does, right?" The next few weeks were a masterclass in subtle manipulation. Every family phone call somehow circled back to Michelle's housing situation. "She's been looking at apartments, but the rent prices are just criminal these days," Mom would sigh. "It would actually be cheaper for her to own." Dad would mention how proud he was of my financial responsibility, how I'd always been so good with money, how family should stick together. Michelle started dropping by my condo more often, usually with takeout and stories about her latest apartment hunting adventures. "The places I can afford are just so depressing, Becca," she'd say, using the childhood nickname that always made me soften. One place had black mold in the bathroom, another had bars on the windows like a prison. "I just want somewhere safe and clean, somewhere I can finally build a real life." The guilt was expertly applied, layer by layer. Wasn't I blessed to have such a stable career? Didn't I remember how Michelle used to share her Halloween candy with me when we were kids? Wouldn't it be wonderful to see her finally settled and happy? The logical arguments were wrapped in emotion, tied up with family loyalty, and presented with that unshakable assumption that of course I would help. Because that's what good sisters do. I started avoiding family dinners. When Mom called to ask why, I made excuses about work deadlines and social obligations. The truth was, I could feel the walls closing in. Every conversation felt like a negotiation I hadn't agreed to participate in. Every family interaction came with an unspoken price tag. But the pressure only increased. Mom started sending me real estate listings via text message. "Just so you can see what Michelle is looking at," she'd say. "Isn't it lovely?" Dad would mention how the housing market was so competitive, how Michelle might miss out on her dream home if she didn't act quickly. Michelle herself started talking about the house like it was already decided, measuring for furniture, planning where she'd put her art, describing the housewarming party she'd throw. The manipulation reached its peak 3 months later. I walked into my parents' house for what I thought was just a regular Sunday dinner to find Michelle already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder spread open in front of her. Mom was bustling around with unusual energy, and Dad was wearing his serious conversation expression. "Rebecca, honey, sit down," Mom said, gesturing to the chair across from Michelle. "We need to discuss Michelle's housing situation." That's when I saw the papers. Mortgage application forms, credit check authorizations, and at the bottom of the stack, a cosigner agreement with my name already typed in. My full name, my social security number, my employment information. Everything filled out in Michelle's careful handwriting except for the signature line. "We found the perfect house," Dad said, his voice carrying that tone of finality that meant the decision had already been made. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, granite countertops, hardwood floors throughout. It's in a really good neighborhood close to shopping and restaurants. The mortgage payment is $1,800 a month, Mom added quickly, like she was ripping off a Band-Aid. But Michelle's applied for several new jobs and she's confident she'll be able to contribute significantly. I stared at the papers, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. "You want me to co-sign for an $1,800 mortgage?" "It's really more like you'd be the primary signer," Michelle said, her voice small and apologetic. "My credit isn't quite where it needs to be yet, but I promise I'll pay every month. This is just to get me approved." The math hit me like a physical blow. $1,800 a month times 30 years. plus property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs. They were asking me to commit to over $500,000 in financial responsibility for a house I would never live in, for a sister who had never successfully maintained a job or paid a bill on time in her entire adult life. "You've saved enough," Mom said, her voice taking on that gentle but firm tone she'd used when I was a child refusing to eat my vegetables. "It's time you help family. This is what we do for each other." The room felt like it was tilting. These people who were supposed to love me, supposed to want what was best for me, had sat around this table and planned out how to make me financially responsible for Michelle's entire adult life. They'd researched mortgage options, calculated payments, filled out applications, all without once asking if this was something I wanted to do. "I never agreed to this," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. "You don't have to agree to anything right now," Dad said quickly. "Just look at the numbers. Think about it rationally. You're making good money. You have savings. Your own housing costs are low. You can afford this, Rebecca, and it would change Michelle's entire life." But that was exactly the problem. It would change my life too. It would tie me to Michelle financially for the next 3 decades. It would mean every month for the rest of my working career, I'd be responsible for her housing costs. If she lost another job, when she lost another job, the mortgage would fall to me. If she damaged the property, if she defaulted, if she decided she didn't like the house anymore and wanted to move, I'd be left holding the bag for hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I can't do this," I said, pushing the papers away from me. "This is too much. This is my entire financial future." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Mom's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disappointment, and then something harder. "We're not asking you to give us money, Rebecca. We're asking you to help your sister achieve the American dream. Don't you want Michelle to have a stable home?" "Of course I want her to have stability," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "But this isn't helping her achieve anything. This is me buying her a house while she gets to play homeowner." Michelle's eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe you think so little of me. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance. One chance to prove that I can build a life." "You've had chances," I said, the frustration finally breaking through. "You've had job after job, opportunity after opportunity. And every time something goes wrong, I'm the one who has to help pick up the pieces financially." "That's what family does," Dad said, his voice getting louder. "We support each other. We sacrifice for each other. Your mother and I sacrificed plenty to raise you girls, to give you opportunities. This is your chance to give back." Give back. Like my childhood had been some kind of loan that was now coming due. Like working 2 jobs through college while they paid for Michelle's failed attempts at finding herself was somehow me taking advantage of their generosity. The rewriting of history was so blatant, so shameless, that I could barely breathe. "I'm not signing these papers," I said, standing up from the table. "I'm not co-signing a mortgage, and I'm not taking financial responsibility for Michelle's life choices." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Michelle started crying, not just tears, but full-body sobs that shook her shoulders. "I should have known," she said between gasps. "I should have known you'd be selfish when it really mattered. You've always thought you were better than me." "This isn't about being better than anyone," I said, but I was talking to a wall. The narrative was already set. I was the selfish sister, the one who had everything but wouldn't share, the one who would rather see her own family struggle than sacrifice anything for their benefit. Mom stood up and put her arms around Michelle, shooting me a look that could have melted steel. "I think you should go home and really think about what family means to you, Rebecca, because right now I don't recognize the daughter I raised." I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the space of 30 minutes, I'd gone from beloved daughter and sister to family pariah, all because I wouldn't sign my name to a mortgage that could bankrupt me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe good sisters did sacrifice their financial security for their siblings' dreams. Maybe I had been raised with values I was now betraying. But then I thought about Michelle's job history. 7 positions in 5 years. The longest she'd ever kept a job was 8 months, and that was only because she was dating her supervisor. I thought about the times I'd lent her money for rent, for groceries, for car repairs, and how it always took months of reminders to get paid back, if I got paid back at all. I thought about my own sacrifices, my own careful planning, my own dreams that I'd deferred to build financial security. The next morning, Mom called. Her voice was carefully controlled, artificially bright. "Hi, honey. I hope you've had time to think about yesterday. Dad and I were talking, and we want you to know we understand this is a big decision, but we also want you to understand how important this is for Michelle. She's finally ready to build a real life, and this house could be the foundation for everything." "Mom," I said, "I can't take on an $1,800 mortgage payment. I just can't. It would completely change my financial situation." There was a long pause. "We're not asking you to pay the mortgage, Rebecca. We're asking you to co-sign so Michelle can get approved. She'll make the payments. But if she can't make the payments, then I'm responsible. That's what co-signing means." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you saying you don't trust your own sister?" The guilt was like a physical weight on my chest. It's not about trust. It's about financial reality. Michelle has never consistently paid for anything in her adult life. That's a terrible thing to say about your sister. Mom's voice was getting colder. Michelle has had some challenges, yes, but she's grown so much. This house could be exactly what she needs to become more responsible. It was a circular argument with no exit. Michelle needed the house to become responsible, but she needed to be responsible to handle the house. And somehow, I was supposed to bridge that gap with my credit score and my savings account. The pressure campaign intensified over the next 2 weeks. Dad would call during my lunch breaks with new arguments. "We looked at the numbers, Rebecca. With your salary and your current expenses, you could easily handle the mortgage payment if Michelle ever had a temporary setback. It's really not that much money for someone in your position." Michelle started showing up at my office building, waiting in the lobby with coffee and sad stories about the apartments she'd looked at. "There was one place that seemed okay," she'd say, "but the landlord wanted first month, last month, and security deposit up front. Plus, the walls were so thin I could hear the neighbors arguing all night. I just can't live like that anymore, Becca. I'm 32 years old. I deserve a real home." Even extended family members started weighing in. Aunt Rosa called to tell me how proud she was of my success, and how wonderful it would be if I could help Michelle achieve the same kind of stability. Cousin Miguel mentioned at a family barbecue how lucky Michelle was to have such a generous sister. The message was clear. This wasn't just between Michelle and me anymore. This was a family expectation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was working late, trying to finish a project proposal that was due the next morning when my phone rang. It was Michelle, and she was crying. "Becca," she sobbed, "they accepted someone else's offer on the house, the one we looked at, the one with the granite countertops. It's gone." I felt a wave of relief so strong it made me dizzy. "Oh, Michelle, I'm sorry. I know you really liked that house." "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "This was my chance. This was my one chance to have something beautiful, something that was mine. And now it's gone because you wouldn't help me. Michelle, there will be other houses." "No," she interrupted. "There won't be other houses like this one. This was perfect, and now some stranger is going to live there instead of me. Some stranger who probably doesn't even appreciate how special it is." The conversation spiraled into familiar territory. Michelle's disappointment, my guilt, the family expectations, the missed opportunity. But this time, something was different. This time, I could hear the manipulation clearly, like someone had adjusted the frequency on a radio, and suddenly the static was gone. Michelle wasn't crying because she'd lost a house. She was crying because her plan to make me financially responsible for her life had failed. The tears, the guilt-tripping, the family pressure, it was all designed to wear me down until I'd sign anything just to make it stop. "I have to go," I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "I have work to finish." "Work is more important than your sister's happiness?" she asked, her voice turning sharp. "Right now, yes," I said, and hung up. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to co-sign any mortgage papers. I wasn't going to finance Michelle's American dream. I wasn't going to sacrifice my financial security for someone who had never shown any indication that she could handle financial responsibility. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they'd be angry for a while, maybe give me the cold shoulder for a few months, but eventually they'd move on and find another solution. Michelle would get a roommate, or find a cheaper apartment, or maybe even keep a job long enough to improve her credit score. I was so incredibly naive. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find a manila envelope wedged between my front door and the frame. My name was written on the front in block letters, but there was no return address. Inside was a legal document that made my blood run cold. Martinez vs. Martinez. Civil complaint for breach of family obligation and unjust enrichment. The plaintiffs, Robert and Patricia Martinez, were suing their daughter Rebecca Martinez for $350,000 in damages related to her refusal to provide promised financial support for her sister's housing needs. I read the document 3 times before the words sank in. My own parents were taking me to court. They were claiming that I had promised to help Michelle buy a house, that the family had made financial decisions based on my commitment, and that my refusal to follow through had caused significant financial and emotional harm. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the basic argument was clear. By being part of a family that had always supported each other financially, I had entered into an implied contract to continue that support when needed. By refusing to co-sign Michelle's mortgage, I had breached that contract and caused damages equal to the cost of the house Michelle could no longer afford. It was insane. It was legally ridiculous, but it was also terrifying because lawyers had written it and court clerks had filed it, and somewhere a judge was going to have to decide whether my refusal to mortgage my future for my sister's benefit constituted a breach of family obligation. The lawsuit changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a family disagreement about money. This was a legal battle that could destroy my credit, my savings, my entire financial life. Even if I won, even if the court threw out the case as frivolous, I'd have to hire lawyers, take time off work, spend thousands of dollars defending myself against my own family. The genius of it was breathtaking. They'd found a way to force me into exactly the financial commitment I'd been trying to avoid. Win or lose, this lawsuit was going to cost me everything I'd worked for. And that's when I realized this had never been about Michelle's housing needs. This had never been about family support or sister loyalty or helping someone achieve their dreams. This was about power and control and the absolute certainty that I would always be there to fund whatever lifestyle my family felt they deserved. They'd spent 35 years training me to be their financial safety net, and when I'd finally tried to opt out, they'd decided to force me back in through the court system. The lawsuit wasn't punishment for my refusal to help Michelle. It was the backup plan they'd probably been considering all along. As I sat in my living room, holding papers that accused me of breaching a family obligation I'd never agreed to, I finally understood the truth about my family. I wasn't the beloved daughter who'd been given opportunities and expected to share them. I was the designated resource, the family ATM, the one whose financial success existed solely to subsidize everyone else's dreams. And now they were going to court to make it official. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't focus on code reviews and project deadlines when my own parents were trying to legally force me into financial servitude. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the lawsuit papers until the words blurred together, feeling like I was drowning in a nightmare that made no logical sense. My first instinct was to call them. Surely this was some kind of mistake, some misunderstanding that could be resolved with a simple conversation. Maybe their lawyer had filed the wrong paperwork, or maybe this was just a scare tactic to get me to reconsider the mortgage situation. But when I picked up my phone to dial Mom's number, my hands started shaking so badly I couldn't press the buttons. These people had sat in a lawyer's office and described their daughter as someone who owed them $350,000. They'd signed papers accusing me of emotional and financial harm. They'd chosen to turn a family disagreement into a legal battle that could destroy my life. There was no mistake here, no misunderstanding to clear up. This was deliberate, calculated, and designed to force me into submission. I spent the rest of the day Googling phrases like family obligation lawsuit, and sued by parents, and finding absolutely nothing that resembled my situation. The closest I could find were cases about elderly parents suing adult children for financial support, but those involved decades of dependency and clear financial agreements, not parents demanding their daughter buy her sister a house. By evening, I was spiraling into full panic mode. What if they won? What if some judge decided that family loyalty was legally enforceable? What if I lost my condo, my savings, everything I'd worked for because I'd refused to enable my sister's irresponsibility? I barely slept that night, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios until I was nauseated with anxiety. The next day, I forced myself to go to work, but I was useless. I kept refreshing legal websites on my computer, trying to understand what breach of family obligation even meant in legal terms. My coworker Jake noticed me reading the same paragraph over and over and asked if everything was okay. "Just some family stuff," I said, which was possibly the understatement of the century. Want to talk about it?" he offered. "Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective." I looked at Jake, married, 2 kids, normal family dynamics, and realized I couldn't even begin to explain my situation without sounding insane. How do you tell someone that your parents are suing you for refusing to buy your sister a house? How do you make that sound like anything other than complete dysfunction? "Thanks, but it's complicated," I said, closing my laptop before he could see the legal terminology on my screen. That afternoon, I finally did what I should have done immediately. I called a lawyer, the receptionist at Martinez and Associates, ironic considering my last name, scheduled me for a consultation the following day with someone named David Chen who specialized in family law and civil litigation. Walking into that law office felt surreal. I'd never needed a lawyer before, never imagined I'd be sitting across from someone in a 3-piece suit discussing whether my parents could legally force me to finance my sister's lifestyle. David Chen was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a manner that was both professional and surprisingly warm. "Tell me about the situation," he said after I'd handed him the lawsuit papers. I started at the beginning, explaining the family dynamics, the pressure to co-sign Michelle's mortgage, my refusal, and then the bombshell lawsuit. As I talked, I watched his expression change from polite interest to genuine surprise, to something that looked almost like anger. "This is highly unusual," he said when I finished. "In fact, I've never seen anything quite like it. There's no legal precedent for parents suing their adult child for refusing to provide financial support to a sibling, especially when no explicit agreement was ever made." "So they can't win?" I asked, feeling the first flicker of hope I'd had in days. "Legally, this case has no merit," he said firmly. "The concept of family obligation isn't enforceable unless there are specific circumstances, like written agreements, established patterns of legal dependency, or court-ordered support. Your refusal to co-sign a mortgage for your sister doesn't constitute breach of contract or unjust enrichment by any reasonable legal standard." The relief was so intense I almost started crying right there in his office. "So what happens now?" "We file a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim," he said, already making notes on a legal pad. "This should never have made it past the filing stage. But Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is this really about the money?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your parents hired a lawyer to file a lawsuit they have virtually no chance of winning. That costs money. Probably several $1,000s just to get this far. They're not stupid people, and their lawyer isn't stupid either. Everyone involved knows this case won't stand up in court. So why file it?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "You think this is about something else?" "I think this is about control," he said gently. "I think this lawsuit is designed to pressure you into settling out of court, which means giving them what they want to make it go away. Even if they lose, which they will, you still have to pay legal fees, take time off work, deal with the stress and embarrassment of being sued by your own family. It's a form of financial and emotional coercion." The room felt like it was spinning. "You're saying they're using the legal system to manipulate me?" I'm saying this looks like a pattern of behavior that extends far beyond disagreeing about a mortgage, he said. How long have they been making financial decisions that assumed your compliance? I thought about it. The college expenses they'd paid for Michelle while I worked 2 jobs. The family vacations I was expected to contribute to as soon as I graduated. The endless small loans and emergencies that somehow always became my responsibility. The assumption that my financial success existed to benefit the entire family. Always, I said quietly. Since I got my first real job, they've acted like my money was family money. And what happened when you tried to set boundaries before this? I never really tried, I admitted. I thought I was being a good daughter. I thought helping family was the right thing to do. David leaned back in his chair, studying me with those kind but shrewd eyes. Rebecca, I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to hear. What you've described isn't normal family support. It's financial abuse. You've been conditioned to believe that your financial resources belong to your family. And when you finally tried to establish independence, they escalated to legal threats to maintain control. Financial abuse. The words hit me like a slap. I'd heard the term before, usually in the context of romantic relationships where one partner controlled all the money. But this was my family. These were the people who'd raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They're my parents. They want what's best for me. Do they? He asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they want what's best for Michelle, and they've decided that's your responsibility to provide. I left that meeting feeling like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged all my internal organs. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my role, about what it meant to be a good daughter and sister, was suddenly questionable. I drove home in a daze, David's words echoing in my head. Financial abuse, control, manipulation, coercion. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I Googled signs of family financial abuse. What I found made me feel sick to my stomach. The websites described patterns that were so familiar they could have been written about my own life. The expectation that successful family members would financially support unsuccessful ones. The guilt and shame used to enforce compliance. The escalation of pressure when boundaries were attempted. The assumption that saying no to financial requests was selfish and cruel. One article mentioned support groups for people dealing with family financial abuse. I found a local group that met on Thursday evenings at a community center across town. The idea of walking into a room full of strangers and admitting that my family was suing me felt terrifying. But I was desperate for some kind of perspective that didn't come from inside my own head. Thursday evening, I sat in my car outside the community center for 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. The meeting was in a small conference room with fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable metal chairs arranged in a circle. There were maybe 8 people there, ranging in age from their 20s to their 60s, and they all looked surprisingly normal. I don't know what I'd expected, maybe people who looked visibly damaged or downtrodden, but these could have been co-workers or neighbors or people standing in line at the grocery store. The group leader, a woman named Sarah, who looked like she might be a kindergarten teacher, invited everyone to share if they felt comfortable. I listened to stories that were variations on my own theme. The daughter whose mother expected her to pay for everyone's cell phone bills. The son whose father had taken out credit cards in his name without permission. The woman whose siblings had convinced her that paying for her nephew's private school was her family duty. When Sarah looked at me, I found myself talking before I'd consciously decided to speak. My parents are suing me for $350,000 because I refused to co-sign my sister's mortgage. The words sounded insane coming out of my mouth, but nobody in that circle looked shocked or disbelieving. How long have they been financially dependent on you? Asked a man named Robert who was probably around my dad's age. They're not dependent on me, I said automatically. They both work. They have their own income. But they expect you to pay for things beyond your own needs, said a younger woman whose name I hadn't caught. I thought about it. Well, yes. Family emergencies mostly, when Michelle needs help with rent, or when they want to take a family vacation, or when the car needs repairs. Those aren't emergencies, Robert said gently. Those are normal life expenses, adult expenses. The fact that they expect you to pay for them instead of handling them themselves is the problem. But family is supposed to help each other, I said, hearing my mother's voice in my own words. Help, yes, said Sarah, but not enable. There's a difference between helping someone through a genuine crisis and becoming financially responsible for their lifestyle choices. The conversation that followed was like someone turning on a light in a room I'd been stumbling through in the dark for years. These people understood the guilt, the manipulation, the way family love could be weaponized to enforce financial compliance. They understood the confusion of feeling selfish for wanting to keep your own money while simultaneously feeling resentful about being treated like a bank account. The lawsuit is an escalation, explained Robert, who'd been through something similar with his own siblings. When the normal guilt and pressure don't work, they're trying legal intimidation. But here's the thing. The fact that they're willing to take you to court proves this was never about love or family support. This is about power and control. I went home that night feeling like I'd been given permission to be angry. For the first time since this whole situation started, I wasn't focused on whether I was being a bad daughter or sister. I was focused on the fact that my own family had decided to use the legal system to try to force me into financial servitude. The anger felt clean and clarifying. It burned away the guilt and confusion and left something harder and more solid in its place: determination. I wasn't going to let them do this to me. I wasn't going to settle out of court to make their frivolous lawsuit go away. I was going to fight this thing all the way to the end because giving in now would only teach them that legal intimidation was an effective way to control me. David filed the motion to dismiss just as he'd promised. In his legal brief, he systematically destroyed every aspect of my parents' case, pointing out the absence of any legal precedent for their claims and the complete lack of evidence for any binding agreement between me and my family regarding financial support. The response from my parents' lawyer was everything David had predicted: a desperate attempt to reframe the situation as a breach of implied contract based on established family patterns. They argued that because I had previously provided financial assistance to family members, I had created a reasonable expectation of continued support. They claimed that Michelle had suffered emotional distress and financial hardship as a direct result of my refusal to honor my family obligations. Reading their arguments felt like being gaslighted in legal terminology. They'd taken every act of love and generosity I'd ever shown my family and twisted it into evidence of some kind of binding contract. Every time I'd helped with rent or groceries or emergencies, I'd apparently been signing an invisible agreement to support my family indefinitely. But David was confident. "This is exactly what I expected," he said during our next meeting. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, but none of it has any legal merit. The judge is going to see right through this." The hearing for the motion to dismiss was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late April. I took the day off work and met David at the courthouse, an imposing concrete building downtown that made me feel small and insignificant. I'd never been inside a courtroom before, and the formal atmosphere, the wood paneling, the elevated judge's bench, the court reporter with her mysterious typing machine, felt surreal and intimidating. My parents were there with their lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she specialized in making people's lives miserable. I hadn't seen Mom and Dad since that awful dinner where they'd presented me with the mortgage papers, and the sight of them sitting across the courtroom aisle hit me like a punch to the gut. They looked older somehow, more fragile, and for a moment I felt that familiar stab of guilt. These were the people who'd raised me, who'd attended my school plays and graduation ceremonies, who'd been proud of my achievements and supported my dreams. How had we gotten to the point where we were facing each other across a courtroom like enemies? But then I remembered David's words about financial abuse and control, and I forced myself to see the situation clearly. They'd chosen this. They'd decided that suing their own daughter was preferable to accepting her right to make her own financial decisions. Whatever love and support they'd shown me in the past, they'd been willing to weaponize it the moment I'd tried to establish independence. Judge Patricia Williams was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my high school math teacher. She listened patiently as both lawyers presented their arguments, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharp legal mind and what seemed like growing irritation with the entire situation. When my parents' lawyer finished her presentation, Judge Williams looked directly at her and asked the question that changed everything. "Counselor, can you point to any legal precedent where an adult child has been held financially liable for a sibling's housing costs in the absence of a written agreement or court order?" The lawyer fumbled through her notes, clearly unprepared for such a direct challenge. "Your Honor, while the specific circumstances may be unique, the principle of family obligation has been recognized in various contexts." "That's not what I asked," Judge Williams said firmly. "I asked for legal precedent. Do you have any case law that supports your client's position?" The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Finally, the lawyer admitted that no, she didn't have specific precedent, but that didn't mean the case lacked merit. Judge Williams turned to David. "Mr. Chin, would you like to respond?" David stood up with the confidence of someone who knew he held all the winning cards. "Your Honor, the absence of any legal precedent is exactly the point. The plaintiffs are asking this court to create new law that would make adult children financially liable for their siblings' lifestyle choices based solely on family relationships. Such a ruling would be unprecedented, inappropriate, and contrary to basic principles of individual financial responsibility. Furthermore," he continued, "the plaintiffs' own evidence contradicts their claims. They argue that my client created an expectation of financial support through past assistance, but their lawsuit seeks $350,000, an amount that far exceeds any previous help she provided. If their theory were correct, my client would be liable for every financial need her family members might ever have, in perpetuity, simply because she once helped with groceries or rent." Judge Williams nodded, making notes as David spoke. When he finished, she looked back at my parents' lawyer. "Counselor, your clients are asking this court to enforce what they claim is a family obligation. But where is the obligation documented? Where is the agreement that created this supposed duty?" "Your Honor, family relationships create inherent obligations in specific, legally defined circumstances," Judge Williams interrupted. "Parent-child support obligations, for example, are clearly established by statute. Spousal support obligations are defined by marriage law, but sibling housing obligations? Adult-child financial support to parents? These exist only when explicitly agreed upon or court-ordered." She shuffled through the papers in front of her, her expression growing more stern. "What I see here is a family disagreement that has been inappropriately brought into my courtroom. Ms. Martinez's refusal to co-sign her sister's mortgage may be disappointing to her family, but it is not a breach of any legal obligation." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. "Motion to dismiss granted. This case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, given the frivolous nature of this lawsuit, the plaintiffs are ordered to pay the defendants reasonable attorney fees." I sat there in stunned silence as the judge's words sank in. Dismissed with prejudice, attorney fees awarded. It was over, and I'd won completely. But as I watched my parents walk out of the courtroom without looking at me, I realized that winning the lawsuit was only the beginning. The legal battle was over, but the family war was just getting started. The fallout from the court decision was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, I'd received angry voicemails from 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and 5 cousins, all expressing their shock and disappointment at my selfishness. According to the family narrative that was rapidly being constructed, I had sued my own parents, destroyed Michelle's dreams out of spite, and torn apart a loving family because I was too greedy to share my success. The fact that they had sued me, not the other way around, seemed irrelevant to most of my extended family. The fact that the judge had called their lawsuit frivolous didn't matter. What mattered was that I had chosen money over family, and now everyone was suffering because of my selfishness. Michelle left a particularly brutal voicemail that I listened to exactly once before deleting. "I hope you're happy, Rebecca. I hope your precious money keeps you warm at night because you've lost your family over it. Mom and Dad are devastated. They trusted you, they believed you were a good person, and you destroyed them in court. I'll never forgive you for this. None of us will." The isolation was immediate and complete. Family group chats went silent when I posted anything. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming. Cousins who had been Facebook friends for years suddenly unfriended me. It was like I'd been surgically removed from the Martinez family tree, leaving only a scar where I used to be. But the strangest thing was how relieved I felt. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the next request for money, the next family emergency that would require my financial intervention, the next guilt trip about my responsibility to support everyone else's dreams. The silence was actually peaceful. 3 weeks after the court decision, I got a call from Aunt Rosa, the one family member who'd always seemed genuinely interested in my life rather than my bank account. She was crying when I answered the phone. "Mija, I need to tell you something," she said. "I know what really happened. Patricia called me right after the lawsuit, trying to get me to pressure you to settle out of court. She told me the whole story, expecting me to be on their side." My heart started pounding. "What did she tell you?" "The truth," Rosa said, "that they'd planned this whole thing, that they'd already put money down on Michelle's house before they even talked to you about co-signing, that when you refused, they were stuck with a contract they couldn't afford and a daughter who was furious about losing her dream home." The room started spinning. "They'd already committed to buying the house?" "Patricia said they were so sure you'd help once you saw how much it meant to Michelle. They thought if they presented it as a done deal, you'd feel obligated to go along with it. When you didn't, they panicked. The lawsuit was never about family obligation, Rebecca. It was about trying to force you to bail them out of a financial commitment they'd made without your permission." I sank into my kitchen chair, trying to process this information. They hadn't just asked me to co-sign Michelle's mortgage. They'd already committed to buying her a house, using my financial reputation as collateral, assuming I'd be too guilt-ridden to refuse when presented with a fait accompli. "There's more," Rosa continued. "The lawyer told them they had no case, but Patricia insisted on filing anyway. She said even if they lost, the legal fees would be less than what they'd already committed to pay for the house." "So they knew they'd lose?" "They knew. They were hoping you'd settle out of court to avoid the embarrassment and expense of a trial. It was never about winning, Mija. It was about financial terrorism." Financial terrorism. The phrase was so accurate it took my breath away. They'd been willing to destroy my credit, my reputation, my peace of mind, and our relationship, all to avoid taking responsibility for a financial commitment they'd made without my consent. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because it's wrong," Rosa said firmly. "Because what they did to you is inexcusable, and because this family has been keeping secrets and enabling bad behavior for too long. You did nothing wrong, Rebecca. You were protecting yourself from people who were willing to sacrifice your future for their immediate gratification." That conversation was a turning point. It confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. That my family had never seen me as a person with my own rights and needs. I'd been a resource to be managed, a solution to their financial problems, a backup plan for when their poor decisions caught up with them. The next morning, I started making changes. I closed the joint savings account I'd shared with my parents since college, the one they occasionally used for family emergencies. I removed them as emergency contacts and beneficiaries on all my accounts. I changed my address with the bank to a P.O. box so they couldn't receive statements or financial information about my accounts. Most importantly, I started building the life I wanted instead of the life I thought I owed my family. I booked a vacation to Europe, something I'd always wanted to do but had never felt justified spending money on when Michelle might need help with rent. I started contributing to my 401k at the maximum level instead of keeping that money available for family emergencies. I bought myself nice things without calculating whether I could afford to also help with someone else's crisis. For the first time in my adult life, my money was actually mine. 6 months later, I ran into Michelle at the grocery store. It was awkward and painful, seeing her in person after everything that had happened. She looked thinner, more tired, and there was something brittle in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Rebecca," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Michelle," I replied, equally careful. We stood there for a moment, two sisters who'd become strangers, surrounded by the mundane normalcy of cereal boxes and shopping carts. Finally, she spoke. "I got an apartment. she said. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I got a job at the bank downtown. Been there 4 months now. That's great, I said and meant it. I'm glad you're doing well. I'm not doing well, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm broke. I'm lonely. And half our family won't speak to me because they blame me for what happened between you and Mom and Dad. But I'm taking care of myself. For the first time in my life, I'm actually paying my own bills and making my own decisions. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation and emotional blackmail that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years. But what I saw instead was something I'd never seen in Michelle before: genuine accountability. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for all of it, for expecting you to pay my way through life, for letting Mom and Dad sue you, for the voicemail I left after the court hearing. You were right to say no. I needed to hear no. I needed to learn how to take care of myself. The apology hit me harder than any anger or guilt trip ever had. This was the sister I'd always hoped Michelle could become, someone who took responsibility for her choices, who understood the difference between family support and family exploitation. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. Are you happy? She asked. Without us, I mean. Are you happy? I thought about it. Was I happy? I was definitely lonely sometimes, especially during holidays and family occasions that now happened without me. I missed the feeling of belonging to something bigger than myself, the comfort of knowing that whatever else happened in my life, family would always be there. But I was also free from the constant anxiety about the next financial crisis I'd be expected to solve, free from the guilt about spending my own money on my own priorities, free from the exhausting emotional labor of managing everyone else's feelings while my own needs went unmet. Yes, I said finally. I think I am. Michelle nodded, looking like she'd expected that answer. Good. You deserve to be happy. We all do. As I watched her walk away, pushing her cart toward the checkout line, I realized that the lawsuit had given us both something we'd never had before: the chance to build authentic relationships based on choice rather than obligation, respect rather than manipulation, love rather than financial dependency. The judge's question had indeed changed everything, not just the legal outcome, but the entire dynamic of what it meant to be family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their dysfunction, even when, especially when, that refusal costs you the relationship you thought you wanted. I learned that family isn't something you're born into and stuck with forever. Real family is something you choose, something you build with people who see you as a whole person rather than a resource to be exploited. Sometimes that includes the people who share your DNA, and sometimes it doesn't. The most expensive lesson I ever learned cost my parents $15,000 in legal fees, my sister her dream house, and me, my birth family. But it bought me something priceless: the knowledge that I don't owe anyone my financial freedom just because we share DNA, and the courage to build a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. That knowledge was worth every penny.